A year before El Filibusterismo was published, the father of Philippine art was born. A time when change was fierce and a new age was peaking, Guillermo Tolentino witnessed the new republic of the Philippines taking its first steps towards freedom, and he shares that with us through his art found all over the country. Memong, his nickname, was fourth in the 8 children of a tailor in Malolos, Bulacan, a city that supported the first revolutionary government of the Philippines. He grew up during the Philippines' bloody uprising against the Spaniards, amidst the katipunan of Andres Bonifacio, Emilio Aguinaldo's Manifesto for Independence, and the death of Dr. Jose Rizal. Malolos was active with military occupation of Aguinaldo's men, the Military Academy of Luna, and the American Thomasites. Uniformed men and horses, shouts and shots in the air, reverberating by the estuaries of Malolos, the elementary playground of young Guillermo Tolentino. Along the banks of the fish ponds of his childhood, the loamy and mucky tidal swamp soils acted as Guillermo Tolentino's first expressions of himself into our world. Unlike his predecessors in the Neolithic age, who used the buraks of Bulacan to make potteries, he molded horses and dogs with the creamy texture of the gray with brownish tinge muds. He saw and recreated. To a boy so young in a city that was amassed with so much activities, it was the Thomasites, the Americans, that would cast this boy's future to the sea of possibilities. Now called Bulacan State University, this intermediate school taught Guillermo English, reading, grammar, geography, and more importantly, mechanical and free-hand drawing, under the encouraging guidance of H.A. Brodner. These instruments, with the reinforcements of his cousin, gave him the boldness to leave Malolos to pursue higher learning. He worked as a houseboy for his uncle, Tata Pepe, while alternating his schooling in Manila High School in Intramuros and School of Fine Arts in UP. Guillermo Tolentino's hunger to perfect was clearly evident with his pursuit of learning. His Tata Pepe fortified Guillermo's ambitions when he was able to interest the playwright, then editor of Liwayway, Severino Reyes, the Galeria de Filipinos Ilustres. It was said to have been the Filipinos' favorite art piece in their living room before the Last Supper. Guillermo's painting was such an emotional piece that Severino Reyes took it to the printing house of Carmelo and Bowerman to be proliferated as a poster, an epical event in everyone's history, Guillermo's and moreover the Filipino people, who finally had an identifiable 13 heroes they can aspire to, as they did to the young Guillermo. Gallery of Illustrious Filipinos is one of Guillermo's earlier paintings. We could see his adoration for Andres Bonifacio, father of the Katipunan. He placed him in the middle where our eyes are immediately drawn to. Ironically, or naturally, Bonifacio will be his monumental sculpture, the Cry of the Balintawak, and just behind him is one Luna, who died when Guillermo was only 9 years old, but his impression on the young Guillermo was so significant, he placed the great painter beside the sun. Guillermo could easily paint his idealism on paper, but being a sculptor, he had to be pragmatic, an attribute that landed him work with architect Juan Arellano. Guillermo skillfully molded the back of Biak na Bato as the facade of Casino Español de Manila. A more significant project they did was the Palma family tomb in Cementerio del Norte. The heralded and already commissioned artist Guillermo Tolentino graduated UP of Fine Arts, but he felt unfinished. Employ was not a question. He was offered different projects, notably with Tomas Zamora, who had contracts for the proliferation of the Rizal monuments and mausoleums. He thirsted for something more, beyond the awards, beyond the affluence. The pragmatic sculptor took a back seat for the dreamer in the estuaries of Malolos. With only few dollars in his pocket, the Filipino dreamer crossed the Pacific Ocean, and the 29-year-old sculptor landed in Washington, D.C. What it must have been like for him to be surrounded by the Greek revival movement of neoclassical statues abound in the nation's capital of the Thomasites, and by the steps of the White House, Guillermo ignited the dream and reality to come together when he hand-delivered packs to the 28th President of the United States of America, Woodrow Wilson. This small statue of a mother and child can still be seen in the Nobel Prize winner's home, now turned museum. This bold move of the sculptor from the fishing town of Malolos, Bulacan, earned him a scholarship in the New York's Beaux Arts from an enthusiast and gracious Bernard Baruch. In New York, Guillermo worked under Gutzon Berglund, whose wife, Elizabeth, trained under Felix Hidalgo. Berglund was a Danish migrant from the Idaho Territory who would go on to sculpt his most famous Mount Rushmore. But by then, Guillermo has already moved on to the Old West, Europe. In the land of the classical, where the greatest sculptors and artists reigned, Guillermo Tolentino had finally coveted Licenciato del Corso Superiore Librero de Scultura with the oldest and most distinguished academy in Rome, the Regia Istituto Superiore di Belle Arti di Roma. He went on to create Saluto Romano that earned him a second place in a sculptural competition. It had been 6 years since he left the Philippines, in search of, in pursuit of. Guillermo Tolentino finally went back home by way of a Spanish ship owned by the General Tobacco Company of the Philippines, who gave him free passage home via Barcelona. Guillermo Estrella Tolentino was finally ready to take his place amongst the national artists in the country. At 36 years old, he started his own studio. With his name came all the honors of multitude of rectitude. The Academy of Roman Fine Arts licensed sculptor finally found his footing and accepted commissions year after year that brought us the most unique of all the statues around the burgeoning metro. 1930, the year Guillermo won a commission amongst 13 other artists to produce the monument of his coveted national hero, Andres Bonifacio. His classical style proposal stood out amongst the flourishing modern art. This was not only an achievement for Guillermo, but for fellow classic artist and best friend Fernando Amorsolo. Being taunted as the de facto leader of the classical realist school, Guillermo had always defended Amorsolo from the modernists who criticized the fellow UP Fine Arts alumni. This was a cry of Balintawak. Guillermo Tolentino's Bonifacio Monument stands to this day in Caloocan, 5 minutes walk from the last LRT-1 station, Monumento. When it was inaugurated in October 23, 1933, 3 years after the American Governor, General Frank Murphy, requisitioned it, 3 years of meticulous labor on his most distinguished monument for his beloved Andres Bonifacio, with 23 other figures in the bronze cast in Italy, on top of German granite and a towering 5-foot obelisk with his winged figure of victory. This was a symbol of independence. This was Guillermo's way of moving from a past molded in tyranny. This was his way to showcase the sons of the nation and their plight. The 8 provinces who fought for independence, the 8 rays of the Katipunan flag under 3 centuries of Spanish rule. And this was 12 years since the beginning of American recognition of the Filipino hero who represented the Filipino spirit, self-taught, driven, enlightened. The unfettering was the dawning of 1930, wherein the same decade it was rightly so, the first Philippine Constitution will be installed and the Republic of the Philippines, an independent nation, will be recognized. Suppression unshackled, it was around as a completion of the Bonifacio Monument that the Oblation was also sculpted, commissioned this time by the first Filipino president of University of the Philippines, Rafael Palma, unveiled the same year as the first Philippine Constitution was signed and sealed. The rise of the Filipinos, as promised by the great poet and national hero Dr. Jose Rizal, was all coming to light. The Oblation is a statue of a young man with eyes shut and arms outstretched towards the sky, an offering uttered from his parted lips, and as Guillermo himself describes it, with breast forward, an act of offering himself, all that inspired by Dr. Rizal's in fields of battle, deliriously fighting. A fight, a cry, a rebellion so unlike the passionate sculptor who fashioned his whole life to following the rules, from his early schooling to attaining the highest of academic license in fine arts. his relentless pursuit of perfection to represent the world he grew up in, his animated sculptors, and a constant contradiction of how he had lived his life. Inelastic, firm, strict, old school, classic. And just like his Dewata, the mortuary sculpture who is now guarding the entryway of the Philippine National Museum of Fine Arts, beautiful, lucid, mysterious, and free, Guillermo continued to spread his wings, offering us his soul, his hands, his hopes.